Hello, everybody. Chris Samardage, Brotherhood of Light Show, current YouTube channel. And this week we just hit 400 subscribers. Whoopee! No, that's kind of not a big number, but anyway, this channel is for everybody who likes live music, and our show this week is going to be about live music albums that came out primarily in the 80s. So here's the show, live rock album trends of the 60s and 70s. There was a huge trend in the 70s for live albums, which you can see in this collage here. You'll recognize a bunch of live albums that came out, and I'm going to go through the albums that I owned and the artists that I liked on this show. There's going to be like a little over 30 different live albums that came out in a 15-year period. So let's check out the first ones where it all started. All right, here it is. So the first, these first three albums are all live, partially live albums. Okay, Cream, Wheels of Fire was recorded at the Fillmore, the old Fillmore, and the Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco. Cheap Thrills, on the one on the right, Big Brother and Holding Company, was recorded at the Ball and Chain. That song was recorded at Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco. And then the Jimi Hendrix Electric Ladyland album, there's a track in it where Jimmy, Jack Cassidy, and a bunch of people, and Steve Winwood leave the Scene Club. They go to the record plant, and they record this song called Voodoo Child. And it's kind of like they have a crowd of people with them, so it's a live performance. They're in the studio, but it's live. You can hear the people talking and clapping, and there's a certain magic to these performances that are on these records that you just don't get when you're in the studio in your separate booths and you're trying to do, drum and bass track and then dub over. I mean, that's the art of recording in studios, but recording live is a different story. Now, I actually talked to Steve Winwood about this session, and he just said the second take was just magic. The first take was really good, but the second take, they ironed everything out, and they just nailed it. And it's like Hendrix is performing a giant concert, a blues rock concert in the studio. And so a lot of bands realized that and decided to make live albums after hearing the Cheap Thrills, Ball and Chain, and then Wheels of Fire record. Now, I lived about 15 miles from Winterland and the Fillmore, so I used to go to these venues. So I'm just a live album kind of guy, man, a live music kind of person. Now, I work in the music business, and I produce live light shows for bands, so it all worked out in the long run for me. All right, so these two records are kind of the first real good live albums that I bought and I really dug. Quicksilver, Messenger Service is their second album. It was released in 1969. It was recorded at the Fillmore. And basically 90% of the record was there. They might have cut things together because it's very jammy and trippy. But it's basically, a band that gets in the studio and tries to do all the psychedelic effects, but they're playing live. They're just cutting loose, and this magic happens. The same with the Grateful Dead. This Grateful Dead live album was recorded at the Fillmore West and the Avalon Ballroom. Now, the Dead are at their best, most instrumental, aggressive sounding, magic-making band at this moment. And so that's what's so great about live albums. It captures these moments of these bands without having the pressure of being in the studio. So then all of a sudden after this huge trend starts to happen. So August of 1969, they do this festival called Woodstock up in New York. 350,000 people show up. Eddie Kramer's there with a primitive recording setup from the Fillmore East, which has been recording a lot of albums, and he records the whole concert, and they release this album, and they release a movie, and it really opened the gates for the live album thing, because This was a triple live album. It sold, double platinum, and then they released a second, Woodstock 2, which didn't do that well, but I thought I'd throw it in here. So this was kind of like Madison Avenue. The record company's going, well, let's do more live albums. So if you don't like live albums, the reason Woodstock kind of like really created the whole phenomena. So that released that year, 1970, is a double live album from Grand Funk Railroad, which I went and saw at Winterland, and they were just a stripped down band from Detroit, and they just three-piece just rocked. And then you had Live at Leeds, The who recorded over in the UK, and Leeds is a venue, and it's just a like a 35-minute blazing rock album. Now later on they released another version of it with all these Tommies and different songs, but the original is just a rocker. Now both these albums are just kick-ass rock and roll through and through. Both did really well and really put the Who on the map as a contemporary rock band, not only a pop band. And then Grand Funk kind of went in the other direction after this album and became a pop band. So the Rolling Stones had just finished a tour in 1969, and they released this album. They were recording a bunch of shows and a film along the way, and they released this album, Get Your Yayas Out. It's just a great rock and roll album. And they're the top. These are the two top artists from the 70s, Jimi Hendrix, Rolling Stones, and then Hendrix records on New Year's 69-70, Band of Gypsies. It's a live album. And there's a whole contract story behind it. But these are both phenomenal live albums. And so now here we go, man. The trend is definitely happening. The two top artists have live albums out, and everybody else is going to follow suit. So now bands are starting to record at the Fillmore East with the same rig that they recorded from Woodstock. And the Allman Brothers come and record a live album called Live at the Fillmore East, which is here on the left. And it is the breakthrough live album pretty much of all time. Now, the one on the right, Eat a Peach, which was released in 1972, has a whole album worth of Mountain Jam that was recorded during the sessions of the Fillmore East. So they're kind of a companion piece, even though one was released later. 71 Live at Fillmore East is just a massive smash, and it just sets the precedent for live albums. I mean, everybody's going to start recording at the Fillmore now, and or has been recording at the Fillmore. Now they're going to start releasing these records coming up. But this is just a wonderful album, and fortunately, I ended up working with the Allman Brothers for 35 years, and I've just been really lucky with my career. But that's another story. So here is two more, released in 71. Recorded at the Fillmore East, Humble Pie, Rockin' the Fillmore, and Johnny Winter Live Ann. And Johnny Winter Live Ann's a great album. I just don't like the rock and roll medley in it, which I don't like. They seem to do that in a lot of live albums, a lot of different artists, but that's just my personal taste. The rest of the album's great. And these are both really big sellers, and just hurl these artists into headlining places like Fillmore and Winterland and playing across the country. So here's our next entry here. Santana 3, it's the last show at the Fillmore West before Bill Graham moves his operation permanently into Winterland, and they record the whole show, and a lot of that show ends up on this album. Now, they had this Legacy edition, and they have a complete live show on one disc, and then the actual studio mix live album, Santana 3. Once again, they capture magic, and they have, the really tight band with a horn section. And then the Grateful Dead on the right here go over to Europe and record their whole tour, and they release a triple album called Europe 72, released in 1972, and it's a great sounding live album. So once again, here we go. 1972. So Jimi Hendrix has passed away in 1971, and so we end up actually he'd passed away earlier than that, but he ends up releasing, they released Hendrix in the West, which is here, the album on the right, and it's a recording from Berkeley, California, and from San Diego. And the Red House from San Diego is absolutely one of the finest blues tunes you could hear in a live album. And so Hendrix seems to do his best blues live, in my opinion. But this other album, Made in Japan, Deep Purple goes over to record, and they're really popular in Japan. They go over to record a record for the Japanese audience only, and it's such a good album, and their Machine Head album hit the charts so well that they were touring on at that point. They released Made in Japan worldwide, and it was a worldwide smash. And I saw this tour, and once again, what I'm talking about is these bands, when they're young and they're on fire and they're not fighting with each other or whatever, and they have fresh new music, they just do some of the greatest live performances. And it was captured on Made in Japan, and it's just a fantastic live album. It's considered one of the best breakthrough hard rock albums of all time. So New York musician Lou Reed gets into it, and he produces this album, Rock and Roll Animal. He's got two or three great guitar players, and it's just a live kick-ass guitar jam album. And it's got stuff like Walk on the Wild Side. And Lou Reed kind of cemented himself as a rock star with this record. And then Johnny Winter Capture Live is released in '76, which is kind of the height of his career. And he's just blazing on this album with Floyd on backup guitar. And it's just Johnny at his finest. Highway 61 on it's just incredible. It's just a great record. So I highly recommend getting that one. Okay, so Robin Trower has a popular couple studio albums out, and he releases this live album, and just Robin Trower Live. It's a single album, unfortunately, but it's really good in '75, and he's another act you want to see live, and luckily I got to see him back in '75. And then Deep Purple releases Made in Europe, which is the lineup with Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale singing, and Ritchie Blackmore's last performances. And so in my case, instead of buying like the album Burn and Stormbringer, both songs are on this. I just bought the live Made in Europe album, and that satisfied my, Deep Purple 3 lineup, purchase. So I started really buying a lot of live albums instead of getting catalogs. So Ritchie Blackmore went on and created Rainbow, and he produced a first Rainbow album, which is kind of a mucky sounding mix, flat kind of sounding album. But when he released the Ritchie Blackmore on stage Rainbow, he had a better band, and it just caught my attention that these guys were really fantastic, and they were just great live performers. Now, it's real jammy. There's a lot of long tracks. There's also a re-release of this same tour of the German, live in Germany, which has got a couple better songs on it. If you were to pick up, this is a cleaner sounding album than that, but that's kind of got the great raw sound, and they were just great live, because I don't think they did a lot of overdubbing at all. And then we've got Bebop Deluxe live in the Air Age, and I fortunately got to see them, and I bought this album, and it was a double album, and they're just really great too. And so they were following the trend of releasing live albums, and the guys back in those days could really play their instruments. They didn't do a lot of trick shit, and they were also sounded really good on stage. Maybe it's because they were more stripped down and didn't have a lot of extra garbage up there. Okay, now it's 1978. So the trend now is going to be everybody's releasing a live album. If they haven't already, they're going to release them, and you'll see a bunch of them coming up. So Little Feat releases this double live album, Waiting for Columbus, which is awesome, sounds great. And then Thin Lizzy releases Live and Dangerous, and that's the album I bought, and I didn't need to buy any studio albums because it had all their hits, and it was like raw rockin', you know, killer versions. So I'm sure if I bought their, you know, catalog, I would have enjoyed some of the other songs, but I pretty much captured the band on this Live and Dangerous album. It's wonderful. So we're going to keep rolling through 1978. So Cheap Trick, Live at Budokan is, or Cheap Trick at Budokan is just a smash hit, and it puts them on the map. And so, you know, every other recording artist is going to try to like match what they did. So here we got Sammy Hagar, who's broken away from Montrose, and he does All Night Long, which has got all his hits from his early 70s, which is, I really liked Sammy back then, even better than his 80s stuff. You know, once again, we got two really good raw live albums that sound great, and released in 1978. So Todd Rundgren and Hall & Oates both released live albums. The Hall & Oates album has all their 70s hits, and I just love Hall & Oates, and I love the live version of them. It's not as poppy. It's got just amazing soul and great vocals by Daryl Hall. Anyway, but the Todd Rundgren album is great. Back to the Bars, I think it's really hard to get, but it's got, Todd Rundgren has so many songs out and so many single albums that it's really difficult to like find his greatest songs, and they're kind of all on this double live Back to the Bars album. So I love this album. I wish I could get it on CD. That's what I'm listening to these days, CDs. So anyway, it's a great record. And it's also, both these albums are in 78. A little bit late for the party, but 1979, Judas Priest released Unleashed in the East, which is one of the greatest live heavy metal albums of all time. Everybody loves it. Everybody copied it. It's just unbelievable. And Queen releases Live Killers, which is that, once again, that's that raw early Queen. It's got all the hits. And I own both these records, and I didn't need to buy any of the other Queen albums. Well, I had Night of the Opera, and this introduced me to Judas Priest, who I went and saw like the next year in Reno. So I never did get to see Queen, though, unfortunately, but both great releases for 1979. And UFO, Strangers in the Night, on the left here. One of the greatest live albums of all time, right in there with Judas Priest, Queen. This album is considered one of the top live albums of hard rock ever. Every song on it's great. It's unbelievable. Michael Schenker's guitar playing is phenomenal. He left right after they released this. Unfortunately, UFO was never quite the same band, but they've released it recently. I think they released like 12 of the concerts, CD box you can buy now because it was such a success. And then we have Ronnie Dio leaves Rainbow and joins Black Sabbath, records 2 records, and they release Live Evil, and here it is on the right. It's got one of the best album covers of all time in my book. So awesome. And, I just bought, like 6 months ago, or a year ago, I bought a version of this, which was remastered. And then they just came out with a box set with re-engineered audio on it. And it's kind of a murky sound for the original. And I'm so bummed, but I don't want to go spend like $40 just to get this one I just bought. But it's a great record. It's a classic to have Dio and Sabbath together. So once again, now we're going to start to lose the trend of these live albums. We're hitting the 80s. So I'm so into live music that in 1983, there's all this music out. It's, there's new wave and all this stuff, which I dig. And I really like the band The Police and all that. But I'm really into live music, and I'm really into retro. And so here's this Doors album gets released, Alive She Cried, and it's like my favorite album of the year. My second favorite album is this live Red Rocks, U2 at Red Rocks, Bloody Red Sky album. So I just loved live music, and I loved the way they perform it on these records, and these kind of throwback, simple, three-piece bands with a lead vocalist. These were my two favorite albums of '93. Believe it. I mean '83. Excuse me. Believe it or not. So once again, these are great, both great albums, live albums. So the trend is starting to lose. People are no longer recording live albums that much. So King Crimson with Adrian Belew version and Robert Fripp and Bill Bruford put together this album, and it's recorded in '84. I think it was released much later, Absent Lovers, but it's basically all the music from their three records they did together, the red, yellow, and blue albums, all on this one live album. And I believe Belew probably overdubbed the vocals, but it's really great if you want to capture them all in one record. It's a double disc. This is the one to get. And then Deep Purple, which is my favorite rock band from the 70s, they reform and go on tour and do the Perfect Strangers tour, and then they do the House of Blue Lights tour, and they record that tour, and they release this album, Nobody's Perfect. But it's good, but it's, I think the magic was back in the 70s, but it's still good. I mean, if you could pick it up, it's worth getting. It's got all the classic hits and some newer stuff on it. It's got a remake of Hush and stuff. So it's good, but it's just one of my favorites, one I had. Now, once again, these are albums that I bought. Now, there's a bunch of bands that are missing out of this show, but maybe I didn't buy them. Maybe I didn't care for them that much, and I didn't buy their records, like Rush. I just wasn't really into them. So, and a lot of the Midwest bands I wasn't into. I mean, I went and saw them live and stuff, but I just didn't buy their albums. And then there's a lot of like Led Zeppelin where I have all the studio albums, and I just didn't dig that live album. So that's, if you think I'm missing stuff, these are the ones I bought, and I just went back into my memory and did the show on the stuff that I purchased. So back in 1990, I started working with the Allman Brothers Band. We went out and we were on the road, and since they had this great success with Live at the Fillmore East, they recorded these two records, first set and second set, and 93 was released and 95 was released, second set. And a lot of it was recorded at the Beacon Theater, where it was sold out. Also, we did some stuff down in Macon and some at the Orpheum Theater. I don't know which ones went on the record, but those were the recording sessions with the truck. And I was, helped do the album cover shoots and stuff like that. So I just wanted to mention these are two great live albums that came out in the 90s. And I'm sure that there's been a lot of live albums put out since then, but I just hit those, the heyday of the hard rock and the 70s and some of the stuff in the 80s. And then a lot of bands just didn't put out live records, but the Allman Brothers were known for it. So I'm going to sign off. You guys subscribe. I have a big 400 subscribers. I'd like to get some more, and hopefully you enjoyed the show. I do them about once a month and just kind of try to talk about rock and roll and my experience in the music business and my experience listening to great music. So we'll see you.